The chamber smelled of old wood and heavy silence. Ned Stark stood in front of the Queen, his jaw tense, the parchment in his hand trembling slightly. He had just laid bare the truth of her children. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not Robert's. They were the product of her incest with Jaime Lannister. Cersei didn't flinch when he told her. She stood there, cold and collected, like a lioness watching a stag bleed out, waiting, calculating, expecting his next move. And that was the moment everything turned. Ned looked into her eyes, not with rage, but with pity. He had expected fear or even desperation, but instead found only pride and defiance. "I won't tell Robert," Ned said at last, his voice low. "Not yet." Cersei blinked, just once. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. "You need to leave," he continued. "Take your children. Go back to Casterly Rock before Robert returns from his hunt. I'll say nothing of what I know, if you're gone by then." It was madness. Ned knew that. But somewhere inside him, the cold blade of honor softened. He remembered what it was like to lose a child. He thought of Sansa, betrothed to a boy who wasn't even the king's son. He thought of his duty not just to the realm, but to his family. Cersei's eyes narrowed. "Why? Why would you let me go?" "Because I still believe this realm can be ruled without more blood," Ned said. "And because I don't want war." She gave a bitter laugh. "War has already begun, Lord Stark. You just don't know it yet." But she didn't argue. She didn't scream. And she didn't stay. By the time Robert Baratheon returned to King's Landing, half drunk and bleeding from a boar tusk in his thigh, the Queen and her children were gone. Robert howled like a dying bear when he found her chambers empty. The servants had no answers. The guards hadn't seen her leave. Only Ned stood before him, calm and quiet, bearing the weight of truth unspoken. "Where is my wife? Where are my children?" Robert demanded, coughing blood into his beard. "They've gone back to Casterly Rock," Ned said. She feared for their safety. Robert glared at him, wide-eyed. "Safety? From what? I'm the king." But he didn't have the strength to fight. Within days, he was dead. Ned could have seized power then. He had the royal seal, Robert's will naming him protector of the realm. But with no heirs in the city, the throne was empty. Stannis was the rightful heir, yet far in Dragonstone. Renly had already fled, whispering of claims and armies. And so Ned waited. He held the city with the City Watch in uneasy alliance, his northern honor growing heavier by the day. But word traveled faster than Ned had hoped. At Casterly Rock, Cersei was not hiding. She was planning. She didn't see mercy in Ned Stark's actions. She saw weakness. And Jaime agreed. They began sending ravens in secret, forging alliances. Tywin Lannister was livid, ashamed that his daughter had been exposed and cast out like a criminal. Within 2 weeks, Lannister banners rose across the Westerlands. Soldiers gathered at Harrenhal. And Cersei's son, Joffrey, declared himself king from the safety of the rock, naming Ned Stark a traitor who had seized the capital. In the north, Robb Stark heard of the Lannister rise and sent word to his father. In the Vale, Lysa Arryn refused. To help, everywhere, houses were choosing sides not based on truth, but power. And in the Red Keep, Ned sat alone, surrounded by paper and silence. He had tried to stop a war. Instead, he had delayed it, given it time to grow teeth. When Renly, Baratheon marched from Storm's End with the Tyrells at his back, declaring himself king, Ned finally understood. By showing mercy to one enemy, he had opened the floodgates to many. And somewhere in Casterly Rock, a lioness smiled. The raven came at dawn. Ned had been walking the battlements of the Red Keep, sleepless, his thoughts coiled around him like northern fog. When the bird landed on his arm, The scroll tied to its leg bore a crimson wax seal, the Lion of House Lannister. He opened it slowly, his eyes tracing the careful, venom-laced words written in Cersei's unmistakable hand. "You were warned, Lord Stark. The lion does not retreat. It hunts." Below, in Cersei's elegant script, Joffrey had proclaimed himself King of the Seven Kingdoms, claiming that his mother had protected him from plotters in the capital, and that Eddard Stark had committed treason by trying to place another on the throne. There was no mention of incest, no whisper of truth, just lies dressed in golden ink. Ned let the letter fall into the wind. By midday, ravens from the Riverlands confirmed it. Tywin Lannister's armies were marching east, burning villages along the way. Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, had already raided the Trident, and Ned knew war had begun, and he had no more room to maneuver with honor. Inside the council chamber, things were fracturing fast. Littlefinger was the first to speak. "Your Grace Protector of the Realm, I should say your enemies multiply while you hesitate." "I won't strike first," Ned said. Varys sighed. Softly, "You already struck, my lord, when you allowed the Queen to flee. Now she gathers venom in peace, while we pretend the Red Keep is a castle, not a trap." Renly Baratheon was gone. He'd fled the city the night Robert died, taking a handful of loyal guards and a heavy cart of gold. Varys said he was raising support in Highgarden. That meant 2 Baratheon claims, a Lannister claim, and no clear king in the capital. Ned stood alone, holding the dying will of a dead king in his hand, watching the realm tear itself apart. The City Watch, gold-cloaked and unpredictable, still followed his lead for now. But whispers said some of them had taken bribes. Some were already declaring for King Joffrey. Sir Barristan Selmy remained at Ned's side. So did a handful of northern guards. And yet, in this den of vipers, even Ned could feel it. He was running out of time. In the north, Robb Stark received his father's letters with growing fury. He wanted to ride south immediately, to raise the banners and avenge the insult against House Stark. But Catelyn urged patience. "If you ride without allies, you'll ride to your death." In River Run, Hoster Tully stirred from illness just long enough to curse the Lannisters and promise swords if war came to their doors. But Catelyn's sister, Lysa of the Vale, refused everything. "Let them burn each other," she wrote. "The Eyrie will not be dragged into southern madness." And yet, the madness was coming to her gates, whether she willed it or not. Meanwhile, Cersei thrived in her exile. She held court in the golden halls of Casterly Rock, dressed in crimson silk, speaking of honor and duty as though she hadn't poisoned the kingdom's very bloodline. Lords came from all corners of the Westerlands to kneel before her son. Joffrey sat on a makeshift throne, wearing a boy's sneer and a man's crown. Jaime remained close, never leaving her side. Their bond was now their weapon. Their shame, their secret, was locked away under stone and steel. They had forged a kingdom from lies and dared anyone to break it. Cersei had even begun writing to Dorne, whispering sweet promises to House Martell, reminding them of Elia and Rhaegar, stoking old fires. If Dorne joined her, she would have the gold, the numbers, and the South. And in her mind, Ned Stark was a fool. A noble, honorable fool who didn't understand the one thing that mattered in the Game of Thrones. Mercy is weakness, and weakness is death. In King's Landing, Ned Stark finally sent out his ravens, not to call for war, but to call for Stannis. Baratheon. It was the one decision he had always intended. The rightful heir, the last shred of his honor. Stannis would not be loved, but he would be just. He would not lie. He would not kneel to Lannister gold. And that, Ned hoped, would save the realm. But when Stannis received the raven, he didn't reply. Instead, he sent ships. And what came with them? Was fire. The ships docked under a stormless sky, sails black as crows' wings, banners bearing the crowned stag of House Baratheon. The people of King's Landing watched from the piers and rooftops as Stannis Baratheon's fleet glided into the black water. Like silent judges, Ned stood on the ramparts, staring at the approaching ships with unease. He had expected an army. He had expected banners, knights, and trumpets declaring justice. But what he saw felt colder, cleaner, too exact. The kind of precision only a man like Stannis could deliver. The first man to step ashore wore crimson robes and a necklace shaped like twisting flames. His face was foreign, sharp-eyed, and unsettling. Melisandre of Asshai. The stories had trickled up from the Stepstones and Dragonstone, of fires that whispered secrets, of gods older than the Seven, and of a red woman who claimed Stannis was chosen by flame to rule the world. Ned didn't believe in gods who whispered, but even he knew power when he saw it. Stannis arrived that evening. He walked into the throne room with no fanfare, no smiles, just hard eyes and a hard voice. "You sent for me, Lord Stark. Here I." Ned stood beside the Iron Throne, though no one sat it. "You are Robert's brother. You are the rightful heir. I called you here to claim what is yours." Stannis' mouth twitched. "You should have arrested the Queen when you had the chance. I tried to spare the realm. You fed the wolves instead." There was silence, heavy. Melisandre watched from the shadows, her red eyes locked on Ned as though peering into his soul. "I will take the throne," Stannis continued, "but I will not beg the people for love. I will take it by right and with fire if needed." "What fire?" Ned asked warily. Melisandre stepped forward. "The Lord of Light has shown us a great darkness, a storm in the north, a crown of lies in the west. All false kings will burn." Ned's eyes narrowed. "We fight men, not gods." Melisandre only smiled. "You'll learn, in time." Within days, the Red Keep changed hands without bloodshed. Stannis was not beloved, but he was feared. The gold cloaks, sensing the shift, in power, bent the knee. Most of the small folk accepted the change. They didn't care who wore the crown, as long as bread was in their bellies. But power always comes at a price. The first execution was swift. Stannis named Grand Maester Pycelle, a traitor for serving the Lannisters too long. Melisandre claimed his soul was dark with false gods. Pycelle was dragged from his chambers and beheaded in the courtyard. The message was clear. Loyalty had a time limit. Varys vanished that night. Littlefinger fled 2 days later with a purse of stolen gold and 3 of the city's best whores. Sir Barristan Selmy remained, grim, but loyal to the realm, not to thrones. Ned watched it all unfold and felt a new kind of dread. This wasn't Robert's rule. It wasn't peace. It was order by fire. And far to the west, Cersei watched too. At Casterly Rock, news of Stannis' coup reached Cersei with a fury that nearly cracked her wineglass. "They've given the throne to that stone-faced bastard?" she hissed, pacing in her solar. Can Ned Stark let him in like a pet dog? Tywin remained silent, sipping his wine. "What are you waiting for?" She snapped. "Burn King's Landing to the ground." "If you must." Tywin's eyes glinted. "No, we will not attack blindly. We will bleed them first." Already he had dispatched Raff the Sweetling and Sir Amory Lorque with shadow forces to harass Riverland supply lines. He knew Stannis would struggle to hold the capital with half the grain of the Reach cut off. But Giam disagreed. He wanted to ride straight to the capital, sword in hand, cut through the false king, and take Joffrey's throne by force. Cersei agreed. She wanted Ned Stark's head, wanted the world to see what came of mercy toward lions. And in secret, she summoned a Sellsword captain from Essos. a man known only as the Jackal of Less. She gave him a single target, Stannis Baratheon. In the capital, Ned tried to keep the peace. He remained as Hand of the King, though now he served. A man even colder than Robert. The days were quieter, but not calmer. Rumors whispered through Flea Bottom, of red priests lighting fires in the night, of strange symbols carved into stone, of children disappearing near the docks. Ned confronted. "Melisandre once, what are you doing in my city?" She looked at him with fire in her eyes, preparing it for the darkness to come. And somewhere in the back of his mind, for the first time, Ned Stark began to fear he had chosen the wrong king. Winterfell had grown quieter since the last raven. Robb Stark stood in the godswood, the wind stirring his red-brown hair as he stared into the still water of the heart tree. He had reread his father's latest letter 6 times. There were no lies in it, just grim truth. Stannis sat the Iron Throne now, and Ned remained in the capital to keep the peace, though Robb could read between the lines. His father sounded restrained, not afraid, but watching something he could not stop. Beside Robb stood Theon Greyjoy, leaning against a tree with a crooked grin. Stannis on the throne. "I'd have wagered gold you'd be marching by now, Lord Stark." Robb didn't answer. He felt it in his blood, the tension, the call to war, the silence before the storm. The Riverlands were burning under Tywin's raids. Ravens from River Run begged for northern banners, and yet his father had not called him to war. But it wasn't just Tywin who cast a shadow now. Reports of fire rituals, missing small folk, and something darker in King's Landing had begun to seep north. "I'll not sit here while the Lannisters burn the Tully's fields," Robb said quietly. "If father won't summon the banners, I will." Catelyn watched from the castle's balcony, heart sinking. She knew that look. Ned's look, Brandon's look. Her sons had inherited more than blood. They had inherited fate. In the south, the Jackal of Lys had reached Westeros. He was a phantom in expensive silks, his face forever smiling, but his eyes dead and calculating. Cersei had promised him a chest of gold and a fleet of Lyseni ships if he completed one task: kill Stannis Baratheon. She gave him names, maps, and gold. He asked for none of it. He only asked one thing: "Do I have permission to be creative?" Cersei, ever the proud lioness, smiled thinly. "Burn the throne if you must. Just leave his crown intact. I want to place it on Joffrey's head myself." King's Landing had grown colder under Stannis' rule, not in weather, but in spirit. The brothels were shuttered, the taverns taxed into ruin, the streets filled with silent red-robed beggars chanting prayers to the Lord of Light. Gold cloaks patrolled more often, but not for protection. They dragged those who mocked Relawler into the dungeons. Some never came out. Ned walked the streets one evening, cloaked and unarmed, trying to see what the people whispered in the dark. He saw fear, not loyalty. Suspicion, not peace. And then he saw it. A child burned in a brazier at a makeshift altar. Men knelt. Women cried. Red priests chanted praises as the flames reached high. Ned pulled him down from the altar with his bare hands, slamming him to the ground. "This is not justice. This is not law." The priest smiled through cracked lips. The flames chose him. His blood was unclean. Ned's knuckles went white. Later that night, he stormed into the throne room. Stannis sat alone, his jaw clenched as if carved in stone. "I will not serve a kingdom that burns its children." Stannis met his gaze. "Then do not serve. But do not lecture me on mercy. Stark, I gave you the throne once, and you handed it back like a boy handing off a hot sword. You spared the queen. She rewarded you with war. You're becoming worse than her. Then leave or bend. There is no middle anymore." Ned said nothing. But he felt something crumble in him that night, something cold and hard and final. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen watched flames dance too, only hers were born of dragons. The news reached her in Qarth. Robert dead, Stannis on the throne, Cersei in rebellion, and the North stirring. She looked at her children Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion as they curled around her tent like shadows. She had waited patiently, learned diplomacy, built strength. But now Westeros bled from its own neck, and when blood flows, dragons fly. The Jackal of Lys struck during a council meeting. It was a flask of wine, nothing more. Sweet arbor red, perfectly aged, poured by a servant who had worked in the kitchens for months without suspicion. Stannis drank, and moments later his eyes rolled back. Melisandre screamed, not out of grief, out of fury. Ned burst into the chamber, sword drawn. But it was too late. Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, rightful heir to Robert Baratheon, was dead, and in the stillness that followed, as the throne room echoed with Melisandre's wild chants and the firelight danced like demons on the walls, Ned Stark realized something. The realm was now his, and it would tear him apart. The Iron Throne sat in silence. It was past midnight when Ned Stark entered the empty hall. Stannis's body had been taken away, wrapped in black cloth, and Melisandre had vanished with it. No one saw her leave, but the smell of burnt air lingered in the Red Keep like a curse. The throne itself, jagged and cruel, loomed in the flickering torchlight, mocking every man who thought they could rule it without spilling their soul. Ned stood at the foot of the dais, his heart heavier than his sword had ever felt. He had never wanted it, never sought a crown, but the realm needed someone to hold it together. With Robert dead, Stannis poisoned, and Renly on the run, there was no king, no law, just whispers and fire. Sir Davos had begged him that evening on bent knee to take the crown. "There's no one else," he said. "The Lannisters are marching, the Reach is tilting toward Renly, and the people fear Melisandre more than the plague." But Ned had stood frozen. He thought of Catelyn in Winterfell, of Sansa still under house arrest in King's Landing, of Arya, missing since the day Robert died, of Jon, alone at the wall, and of Robb his boy, now calling banners and preparing for war in the Riverlands. What would they say if he took the throne? Would they call him a savior or a traitor? Would they see Ned Stark, the man who tried to stop war with mercy, or just another pretender wearing a dead king's crown? By dawn, the city awoke to chaos. Word of Stannis' death spread like wildfire. Some blamed poison. Others blamed sorcery. Most blamed Ned. Riots broke out in Flea Bottom before the morning bell. Gold cloaks clashed with angry mobs. Shops were looted. Red priests were hunted in the alleys, their robes burned in protest. The city watch began to fracture. Half swore loyalty to Ned Stark. The other half refused, claiming he had no right. No royal blood. And outside the walls, worse news came with every raven. Tywin Lannister's armies had crossed the Trident. Renly had seized Highgarden with the Tyrells. And in the north, Robb had taken Riverrun, banners flying, calling himself king in the north, not out of ambition, but defiance. He believed his father had fallen or been imprisoned again. And this time, Robb would not wait. The Seven Kingdoms were now 5 separate wars, and in the center of it, Ned sat at the eye of the storm. He held a council in the Red Keep's broken war room. Only Sir Davos, Sir Barristan, and a few trusted northern men attended. The rest had fled or sworn to Renly or Cersei. Even Mester Cresson had died days ago, his heart giving out when he heard of Stannis' poisoning. Ned slammed his palm on the table. "I will not wear a crown." Davos stared. Then who will rule? The people don't want me. The lords don't trust me. And the Lannisters, they will not stop. If I take that throne, I bring war to every doorstep. You already have, said Sir Barristan. It's not about the crown, Lord Stark. It's about stopping something worse from wearing it. And there it was. Because the letters had come that morning too. From Dragonstone. From Dorne. From Essos. Daenerys Stormburn has dragons. 3 of them. And she was sailing west. That night, Ned sat with the crown in his lap. It had once been Robert's. Heavy, solid, unforgiving. He thought of all the men who had worn it. Madmen, monsters, fools. And how many good men had died trying to keep or destroy it. He looked out over the silent city, smoke rising in the distance, bells ringing not for joy but warning. And at last he made his decision. He would not be king, but he would lead. He would form a council, take control of the armies, and prepare the realm for what was coming. Because it wasn't just the Lannisters anymore. It wasn't just Baratheons or rebels or dragons. It was winter. And it was closer than anyone realized. Far beyond the wall, something stirred in the dark. Blue eyes opened in the snow, and a pale hand reached through the ice, fingers sharp as broken glass. The dead were walking. And Westeros was too busy bleeding to notice. The wind howled across the battlements of Castle, black like a ghost warning of things to come. Snow drifted sideways, thick as fog, coating everything in silence. Jon Snow stood at the top of the wall, his black cloak snapping behind him, eyes scanning the endless white that stretched beyond. He had seen the fire in the sky 2 nights ago, far off toward the Frostfangs, orange against the gray. Then came the missing rangers. And then the bodies. Not just dead. Wrong. Their eyes blue. Their flesh stiff as ice. One of them had been Gren, a brother Jon had shared bread with. Sam swore he saw one of them move after they'd buried him. I heard it, Sam whispered, trembling beside the fire that night. He was scratching from under the snow. Jon didn't want to believe it, but he already knew. He remembered the way the horses screamed in the night. He remembered cold that sank deeper than skin. The White Walkers were real, and they were moving south. In King's Landing, Ned Stark had not slept in 3 nights. He stood before the Iron Throne again, not to sit, but to decide. The city was fraying. The small folks starved. The nobles whispered betrayal. And ravens came daily bearing more tragedy. Robb had won another battle, crushing Sir Jaime's advance near the Whispering Wood. But instead of pushing on to the capital, he had halted, waiting, demanding a meeting with his father. And worse, Renly had crowned himself in Storm's End, declaring himself protector of the realm, with the Reach at his back and a promise of peace for those who joined. Meanwhile, the Lannisters had regrouped. Tywin's forces built siege towers. Gregor Clegane terrorized the Riverlands. Cersei sent mocking letters signed Queen Regent, promising to return and take back what belongs to lions. Ned had one goal now: stop the bleeding. A council had formed around him: Barristan Selmy, Sir Davos, and Maester Gorman from Oldtown. They had no king, but they held the city. Still, power without a crown was a curse. Allies wavered. Loyalty bled away daily. And then came the final blow. Daenerys Targaryen had landed. She arrived not in secret, but in fire and fury. Her ships docked on the southern coast of Dorne, welcomed by Prince Doran with cautious hospitality. But Daenerys brought not only words and titles, she brought dragons. The last of House Targaryen had crossed the narrow sea, and the realm trembled at her name. Ned read the raven's message with a hollow chest. He had hoped she was a myth, or at least far away. But now the people whispered about her in the streets. The Dragon Queen has returned. They said she would burn Cersei, burn Renly, burn the traitors, and cleanse the realm in fire, the same way Aegon had. And somewhere in his soul, Ned feared. The people might accept it, might even welcome it. After all, they cheered for wildfire not so long ago. Far in the north, Robb Stark rode into the ruins of Moat Cailin, surrounded by his bannermen. The air stank of rot and damp stone. The Ironburn had abandoned it days before, but not before setting traps and leaving behind 3 dead scouts nailed to the gate. Robb dismounted in silence, gray wind at his side, eyes flicking to the sky. "We're too slow," he muttered. "Everything's already on fire down south." Great John Umber grunted behind him. "Let the lions and stags rip. Each other apart. We'll deal with the winner." But Robb shook his head. That's what they said during Robert's Rebellion. And look what it gave them. "I'm not marching to feed the fire. I'm marching to stop it." He paused, "to find my father and bring him home." That night, as snow fell in the north and fire flickered in the south, a vision came to Lysander. She was far away now, hidden in a cave beneath Dragonstone, surrounded by red flames and silence. She had failed Stannis, failed her god. But the Lord of Light was not done with her. In the flames she saw it, a crown of snow, a child with a wolf's eyes, and behind him a wall of death and ice that swallowed the world whole. She gasped, falling to her knees. "It is not Stannis," she whispered. It was never Stannis. It was the boy at the wall, and he must be saved, or all must burn. The air in the capital was suffocating, not with heat though summer still clung stubbornly to the south, but with fear. Fear that had taken root in the gutters and grown vines up to the nobility's doors. Refugees from the riverlands now flooded. King's Landing, their stories more terrifying than the truth. Lannister men wearing skinned faces, fields salted with fire, and a monstrous man in black armor who laughed while he burned children alive. Ned Stark sat with the latest scrolling. Hand sent from a surviving bannerman of House Blackwood. The mountain had left villages along the Trident in smoking ruin. Tywin was no longer marching to war. He was making war wherever he walked, and there was no king to answer him. Ned's fingers tightened on the parchment. Even now, with the throne empty, he could feel its presence behind him mocking him, daring him to sit. He still refused. He had ruled the capital as Lord Protector, but he would not wear a crown forged in fire. And lies not yet? No. Lies were all that remained. Ravens flew across the sky like omens. One carried a letter from Renly Baratheon, flowery, polished, and dripping with false peace. He offered to restore order to the realm by marrying Sansa Stark, solidifying a Stark-Baratheon alliance. Ned read it twice and almost burned it on the spot. Sir Davos pleaded with him. If not Renly, then what? Daenerys comes with dragons. Robb is crowned king in the north, and the Lannisters want your head. You're running out of sides to refuse, my lord. Ned stared out over the city. Smoke curled in the distance. Somewhere in Flea Bottom, another. Riot had turned to fire. "I'm not looking for sides," he said quietly. "I'm trying to save what's left of the realm before there's nothing left but ash." Ash, indeed, had become prophecy in the south. Daenerys Targaryen's dragons had grown. No longer cat-sized creatures. Drogon's wingspan now stretched across rooftops. She had taken Sunspear unopposed. Prince Doran had died under suspicious circumstances, and his younger brother, Oberyn, had bent the knee to her in exchange. For blood within weeks, Storm's End fell. Renly's banners scattered as Drogon burned the eastern gate. The Tyrells, once confident in their alliance with him, now turned quietly toward Daenerys. The Reach had food. The Targaryens had fire. Together they were a storm. The Dragon Queen was not marching slowly. She was cleansing anyone who bore a Lannister. Banner was crucified along the Rose Road. Noble houses who had bent the knee to the Baratheons were stripped of titles unless they offered up their loyalty and gold. Daenerys spoke of justice, of freedom, but the smell of burned flesh followed her through every town, and the people cheered, because to them, burning was better than starving at the wall. The wind had stopped. Jon Snow stood atop the ancient ice, watching the forest below. It had grown quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made even the crows uncomfortable. Sam stumbled toward him with a scroll from Mr. Aemon. His face was pale, voice shaking. "They've breached Eastwatch." Jon's eyes narrowed. "How many?" Sam swallowed. "Not wildlings, not raiders. The dead. They were dead, Jon, and they walked. The White Walkers had reached the edges of the realm. The Night's Watch was dying outnumbered, unprepared, forgotten by the world. Jon gathered his black brothers in. The courtyard that night, torchlight flickering on grim faces. "We send ravens, every kingdom, every house, even those who hate us. Tell them the truth. And if they don't believe us?" Dolorous asked. Jon drew Longclaw. "Then we fight without them." Back in King's Landing, Ned read Jon's. Raven under candlelight, his hand trembling. Blue-eyed corpses. East watch fallen. A cold wind rising behind the wall. He sat still for a long time. Then he stood, walked into the throne room, and stared at the Iron Throne for what felt like a lifetime. He called Sir Barristan, Sir Davos, and his council. "We're done pretending this is just politics," he said. "We're done playing their game." "What do you mean?" Davos asked. "I mean we send a message, not to kings or lords, to the people, to the world. The dead are marching. The dragons are burning. And we—" He drew his sword and pointed it at the throne. "We either unite now, or we fall alone." He turned to Mester Gorman. "Send ravens, to Winterfell, to Daenerys, to Robb, to even the Lannisters if you must. Tell them the North remembers. And winter is here." The snow reached King's Landing before the armies did. It came softly at first, drifting through the air like ash from an old funeral pyre. But soon it coated the cobblestones in ghost-white silence, muting the screams and riots. The capital, once teeming with noise, war, and betrayal, stood still for the first time in months. And as the first flakes touched the gates of the Red Keep, Ned Stark stood atop the ramparts and whispered the words the South had long ignored. "Winter has come." The first army to arrive wasn't Daenerys's. It was Robb Stark, his banners high and gray, his wolves snarling through the snow. He rode at the head of 10,000 northern men, armored not in gold, but in leather, steel, and rage. Gray wind howled at the city's walls before the gates opened. Father and son stood facing each other at last, years and wars between them. Ned's eyes were tired. Robb's burned with fury. "You didn't write," Robb said bitterly. "We thought you were dead. Sansa is a prisoner. Arya is gone. And you did nothing. I held this city together with threads while it tried to burn from within," Ned said. "I didn't write because I didn't know if I would survive another day." There was a pause. Then Robb stepped forward and embraced him. "I don't care," he whispered. "I'm just glad you're alive." Daenerys arrived days later. Her dragons circled the sky above the city like judgment passed in flame. When she rode through the gates, the people bowed not because they knew her, but because her power was undeniable. Her hair silver, her face stern, her presence commanding. Drogon landed atop the ruined sept of Baelor, smoke still rising from his breath. Ned met her in the great hall, flanked by Sir Barristan and Robb. She was not what he expected, not mad, not wild, but cold, controlled, calculated. "I am Daenerys Stormborn," she said, "rightful queen of the 7 kingdoms." "You've burned half of them," Ned replied. "I've cleansed them." Robb's voice cut in. "And now what? You burn the north too?" "No," she said. "I've come to save it. Because fire can fight what's coming. Steel alone won't stop death." She laid her hand on the table and unrolled a map. "Wall has fallen." Silence fell like an axe. The night's watch was gone. Jon Snow's final raven came with a black feather tied in ice. The north had been breached. Eastwatch burned. Hardhome lost. Winterfell under siege. And the worst news, Jon was missing. Daenerys clenched her fists. "He was the only one who believed me. And now he's gone." Ned felt something inside him fracture. Jon, his blood, his brother's son, gone north and never returned. A final echo of a long-buried promise. He looked to the others. Sir Davos, Sir Barristan, Robb, Daenerys. "We have no more time," he said. "The game is over. Now we fight to live." For the first time since Aegon's conquest, every major force in Westeros met in the same hall. Ned Stark, Robb Stark, Daenerys Targaryen, Tyrion Lannister, sent by Jaime to sue for survival. Even Brienne of Tarth stood guard as old enemies sat side by side. They formed a pact not for glory, not for thrones, but for life. The pact of ash and ice. 3 goals. Gather every army, every sword, every soul willing to fight. March north to retake Winterfell and fortify it. Face the long night not as 7 kingdoms, but as one. As they spoke, ravens flew to Dorne, to the Iron Islands, to the Vale. For once, banners were raised not in rebellion, but in defense. It wouldn't be enough, because the dead had already crossed the neck. The Battle of Winterfell was a massacre. Ned had not seen war like this. No man had. The dead didn't fear, didn't bleed, didn't break. Grey Wind was the first to fall, ripped apart by a dozen white-eyed whites. Robb fought like a storm, cutting down dozens before being dragged beneath a wave of bodies. Daenerys wept as Viserion fell from the sky, pierced by spears of ice. And then the Night King appeared. He didn't speak. He didn't threaten. He raised his hand, and the fallen rose again, including Robb. Ned screamed and charged, cutting down corpses to reach his son. But Robb's eyes were blue now. His sword turned toward his father. Ned faltered, and that was when a blade of dragonglass plunged through Robb's back. Jon Snow, alive, scarred, standing. "You came back?" Ned whispered. "I promised Arya," Jon said, eyes wet. "I'd bring you all home." The fight was not won, but the tide had turned. With Jon, Daenerys, and Ned fighting side by side, the living pushed the dead back through the gates of Winterfell. The Night King vanished into the storm, his army retreating north, but not defeated. They had only tested the wall of man, and they would return. After the battle, the survivors gathered. Robb was buried beneath the heart tree. Thousands dead. 2 dragons lost. Winterfell half ruined, but they had endured. And from the ruins, a new council formed. Not a king, not a queen. A circle of lords, guided by the old ways and the new. And at its center, Eddard Stark. No crown on his head, no throne. Beneath him. Only snow and silence, and the knowledge that this time he had chosen right, because the real war had never been between lion, wolf, or dragon. It had always been between the living and the dead.